Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and if you've ever wanted a high density video giving you as many tips and tricks about playing light tanks, then this is the one for you. So firstly, light tanks, two different types inside the game. There's your traditional light tanks and there's your wheeled light tanks. Wheeled light tanks are faster, some of them have better camo, but they have massively worse view range. So wheeled light tanks should be played as active scouts until you reach tier 10, and then you have enough view range to also pretty much just play at a mid and ranged distance. Active light tanks like the one that I'm playing, the Lynx, need to use their speed to be able to get closer to their opponents to make up for the poor view range that they have. Also, when you're setting up a light tank, you need to think of one of two ways. Are you going to try and use binoculars and go in a bush, sit there static, set them up and try to be able to really spot your opponents at decent distances? Or alternatively, are you going to go for coated optics, a commander's vision system, and possibly vents, which is the three combination that I'm using on this vehicle, because obviously wheeled light tanks can't use binoculars, to be able to make my active spotting as good as it possibly can. The commander's vision system was a real big buff to wheeled light tanks, yeah, as they really needed one, right? And Equipment 2.0 allowed you to do some crazy things in the EBRs compared to what you were able to previously. The Lynx, however, it actually has the second worst win ratio of any of the tier 8 light tanks. I don't think anyone could claim that the Lynx was absolutely breaking the game and destroying its matches, which is why today's video is going to be immensely challenging to be able to carry in the Lynx. So when I play a wheeled light tank, the first thing that I want to do is think about trying to get an active spot off. An active spot would be trying to get down to where you saw me at the beginning of the video, lighting up about 6 vehicles. That's something that's important to do in your light tanks if you can do so, because if you can gauge where the enemy are going, you can allow your team and also yourself to make more informed decisions about how the battle is likely to progress. If your team sees they're stacking up one flank, then hopefully the more aware players on your team, and the better ones, will be able to adjust their tactics to be able to counter the enemy, or maybe they'll feel more confident in pushing through the other flank. That's one of the most important stages of the battle for any light tanks, is that initial location. Now, the position that you saw me rush there is something you can only do in truly your super fast light tanks, and mostly those are going to be your wheeled vehicles. Alternatively, if you were in another traditional light tank, there is a fantastic position here on Red Shard, which you actually see the LHMTV working. You can go right up into the corner of this bush. This will actually allow you to get some vision underneath the trees there, but more importantly, it will allow you to stop the enemy heavy tanks from progressing through here safely if you've got artillery, or alternatively any tank destroyer sitting up here. So it's just different ways to play your light tanks. Do you have binoculars, or maybe you don't have the best of mobility? Sneak into a bush line and try and get some vision out there. Are you playing a wheeled vehicle or maybe a light tank with some quite poor view range? And you've got to get closer to your opponents to be able to handle them. So when you're setting up your light tanks, I really do not recommend using camo net on any of your light tanks. Sounds bizarre, right? You think, wow, camo, you definitely want to improve the camo rating of all of your light vehicles because you don't want to be seen and you want to be able to spot your opponents. Sure, I guess if you want to maybe sit out in the open in a position that they won't expect and use that camo net to get an exceptional amount of camo rating to be able to not have to sit in a bush. But really, you can sit any light tank in a bush and you'll be practically unspottable unless your opponents get within 50 meters of you. And make sure, while you can't see them right now because I'm having a replay bug, that you use the minimap rings that you can find by going into your general section and also going down here to have the proximity circle and also the view range and the maximum spotting distance circle as well. That proximity spotting circle has been incredibly useful to try and make decisions about, is it really now time to move out the bush? Previously, what I would do is actually put my reticle over the opponents, and you can see the number towards the top of the circle showing you exactly how far they are away. And when they got within that 50 meters mark, that means that you are going to get proxy spotted, and then you should start moving, hopefully before that actually happens. The worst thing that can happen is to be sitting still in a light tank and then only start moving when your sixth sense goes off. Because by then, the enemy have had 2 or 3 seconds to be able to aim at you, and yeah, your hit points aren't going to be doing very well. Okay, so one of the worst things that a light tank player can do, irrelevant if you're playing a wheeled light tank or a traditional light tank, is to die early on in the battle. And the reason for that is that when you're playing on a map like this, which is very large, the fewer the enemies and that are on the battlefield, then that means the tank density is going to be lower, which gives you more room to be able to play. And if you have more room to be able to play, that means you can make use of your speed, and you can also set up lines of fire, but more importantly, lines of vision on your opponents. Light tanks are probably at their most powerful in the middle to the end of the battle. That is really where they start to shine. We're then going to be able to find more one-on-one engagements, or alternatively, when half of the tanks are dead, then that means that you're going to find more room to be able to maneuver and to establish those lines of fire for your team. We can see here, now we're about 6 minutes into the battle, that this is where the Lynx is really going to come into its own. I can use my camo rating, and knowing that the 5100 likely isn't using coated optics, as there are probably better modules to use on a 5100 these days if you want to try and be an all-in assassin in the tank, to avoid his vision, or not get spotted in the first place, spot him with my coated optics, my vents, and my commander's vision system. Because he's moving, I'm going to spot him at a better, decent distance with that commander's vision system and be able to apply a little bit of punishing damage. Now you see that I'm always trying to drive away from the threat. So if the 5100 has spotted me and I think he's going to shoot me, you want to drive away from them and then zigzag. You don't ever want to drive in a straight line, especially don't give the enemy tank a broadside, or it's not going to go very well. There is also a part of the battle where it's no longer a good idea to be passive. You have to start to be active, and when our team was down by 2,000 hit points there, I realized that now I can take some more chances. There are less tanks on the battlefield with less lines of fire, and I am going to have less risk when I try to make those active spots in a vehicle like this, and there is probably going to be more reward for me. It's all about that risk assessment. Is that vision worth risking your hit points, and what is it likely to gain you? Well, in the case of our spot against the STA-1 there, we actually managed to get 1,000 damage and spotting combined against him. Again, you see me immediately drive away from the UDES, try and force them around the corner. This is something that I want to highlight here. If a vehicle is around the corner facing me here, when you're driving towards them or when you're driving away from them, always try to go towards the left to force them to come round the rock to make them more exposed. The worst thing that you could do is to try and drive that way, because that's going to be the easiest shot. Sounds a bit obvious, but you'll be amazed at the amount of players who don't realize that you should always be driving in towards the corner to force your opponents to have the more awkward angle. This is a very interesting situation here, because you'd think that the Progetto was actually spotting, but clearly they weren't, because we actually get some spotting there for the Progetto on their kill on the SU-101. This is what you have to do in your light tanks. Not everybody has good view range. Not everybody has 100% crew or coated optics or vents. Now that Equipment 2.0 isn't in the game, is in the game even, so many players are using worse and worse equipment with regards to spotting and more combat capacity. They're using turbos to go faster. They're using improved hardening to be able to keep their tracks healthy. They're using rotation devices and vertical stabilizers to give them excellent gun handling, which isn't very nice for you when they're trying to shoot at you. But lots of people are now dropping coated optics. Lots of people are dropping vents. And that gives you more room to be able to maneuver at decent distances. But be careful, because the game is also getting faster and faster. And so you have to have that impact early, but also not die early so you can have the impact late. I hope this is all making sense. And right now, with only 5 vehicles left on the enemy team, shutting down that 5100 and using our speed to make big sweeping plays while also staying as far away from the danger as we possibly can, we are going to start to have large influences in this battle. So there was somebody in the cap circle there, but luckily for us, now they're no longer in the cap circle. So that's actually not lucky, because they might be driving towards us, but I'm hoping they may be driving the other way and trying to get safe, or trying to get into a position to get the Progetto. At this stage of the game, if you can take the RNG out of the battle, that is something that you want to do. And in this case, when I say RNG, I mean getting rid of the self-propelled gun on the enemy team. I'm going to go and try and find the FB-207. Now I thought, should I really load a HESH shell here? There's no real benefit. I guess the HESH shell, or the high penetration shell that the wheeled vehicles have, could roll high to be able to one-shot them, but it's very unlikely to be able to do so. It's more likely I'm going to need to fire 2 AP rounds here into the FB. And luckily for us, they've actually had their hit points reduced. Not sure if that was our artillery or if they were spotted earlier, and so we're able to remove them from the game. Now, this is one of the worst things about setting up your light tank to be the master of vision, that your reload time is actually quite poor. When you don't use a gun rammer, when you don't have vertical stabilizers, you've just got to make sure you always try to give yourself as long as possible and try and control the distance. Right now, although you can't see them, which is unfortunate for this video, I'm using the rings on the minimap to know how far I am away from my opponents, and then this is where you can just feel completely safe. I have a funny feeling that some people believe that the vision system in World of Tanks is kind of random as to whether you're going to get spotted. And while I do make mistakes, as sometimes I try to push the boundaries a little bit too much, I'd say that I'm at least 80 or 90% confident about when I'm going to get spotted. Even when I'm going a little bit too close to the flame, and when you do that, yeah, sure, you're going to get burnt. But taking your light tanks into those scenarios where you can judge, is that tank destroyer stationary? Okay, if he's stationary, maybe his binoculars are activated, so I've got to be over 445 meters away from them before I fire, or they're moving. It's a tank destroyer. Very unlikely to have coated optics rather than binoculars unless they're really high tier, so now I can be a little bit more chancy, and I can fire at them when possibly I'm 350 or even 400 meters away from them. Remember that firing is going to massively lower your concealment, and that is where you're going to be spotted. And so it's about only firing when you're pretty sure that you aren't going to get spotted, or alternatively, when you don't really have a choice, and that is in the situation of a 1 versus 4 scenario here for the Lynx. Alright, so we put a round into the Progetto, and I think, shall I go and finish them off? It's too risky. If I go there and I lose some hit points, or alternatively I go there and the Progetto keeps fleeing towards the west, or even if he turns around and goes hold down against me, that's going to be ugly. So alternatively, what I'm going to do is interrupt the cap circle. All 3 of them are in the cap circle. We've got 30 seconds left, and I'm actually going to reload a high explosive round here with 320 alpha damage. This should be able to one-shot the Scorpion with our decent amount of penetration. Unfortunately for us, the 90mm doesn't go through the side of the Scorpion, but luckily for me, by pulling back behind the bush so it's opaque, that means that we can fire through the bush without getting spotted. That is your #1 tool in World of Tanks for dealing damage behind bushes without getting spotted. Go into the bush, spot through the bush, pull back behind the bush, and shoot through the bush when it's opaque. And go and watch my World of Tanks settings guide if you want more advice on how that happens. So we fire a round into the STA-1, low roll, or don't high roll, and then he manages to miss us. But unfortunately, we miss him now, and with 44 seconds left, and probably the Progetto 54 coming up towards the north, I'm starting to get nervous. So my plan is, shoot the STA-1 on the move, and now use our traverse speed to get around the UDES. I'm still loading standard rounds here because the UDES actually has a good amount of high explosive protection with the spaced armor down the side. And right now I'm just leaving the siege mode, or the travel mode, to be able to outmaneuver the Progetto. And now we are in a 1 versus 1 scenario, having secured a top gun and now hopefully taking down this 1 versus 4 situation. And we only have to hit this Progetto once unless we low roll. So I want to avoid the cap circle. I'm going to try and get around him, but he spots us, so we've got to change the direction of our travel and drive right up and fire a shell into his tank. Feel like an absolute boss in this battle, winning this game for our team. We provided them with as much vision as we possibly could early on in the battle, but then after our team was spent, or maybe they just weren't shooting all of the tanks that we were spotting, we've got to take things into our own hands. And what this hopefully shows you is that while you can try to do as much scouting as you can, it's also important to use all of the strengths of the light tanks and their combat capacity to take things into your own hands when your team just purely aren't going to shoot the targets that you're lighting up for them. Now look, light tanks are one of the most complicated and high skill cap classes in the game. So while I made this game look easy, at times I definitely got lucky, and I've played tens of thousands of games in light tanks over the years. But they're still without a shadow of a doubt, because nobody expects them to really carry those games, my favorite class to be able to do so. because, you know, I love an underdog story, and nothing more so than playing, in theory, the second worst light tank at tier 8 in the form of the Lynx. So we get ourselves a Delanglades medal. This is a very unusual one. This is for destroying 4 enemy vehicles who are trying to cap a base, combined with a defender's medal, as you would expect if you've destroyed 4 vehicles inside a cap circle, a high caliber for the 4,000 damage that we dealt, in addition to the 1,266 damage upon detecting. Yeah, this was a bit more of an offensive light tank build, or at least we had to become a more offensive light tank, because even though we set the vehicle up for pure scouting, this team just didn't really feel like it was worth scouting for. So there you have it, hopefully the high impact light tank video that many of you budding scouts out there have been asking for. And if all of this looks a little complicated and you're still struggling to be able to be effective in your light tanks, maybe you don't have all of the fancy moves and you're able to react to the situation, then really you can't go wrong with putting binoculars on a light tank, a commander's vision system, and going and sitting in a bush. It's probably not going to be the most exciting gameplay, but if you absolutely utterly have to get your light tank missions done, or you want to just try and advance up the tech tree with the low pressure gameplay, then learn some of the more prominent bushes on the map, go and dominate them, and get some view range out. But if you do rely on that playstyle, trust me, it's not going to be able to have the impact that you need in a lot of your games. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that was it for today. Really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then make sure you give it a thumbs up. But if you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And if you're watching this video as it goes live on Sunday, then the World of Tanks Tech Tree Showcase is going to be live right now on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby, or at least starting at 8 o'clock server time. And so today I'm going to be playing the Swedish tank destroyers, some of my favorites in the game. So if you want to know everything there is to know about the vehicle that's currently top of the tree on the European server, or to the top on the NA server, then come along and I'll hopefully demystify some of the most accurate and sneaky tank destroyers in the game in the form of the Swedes. So I'm really looking forward to seeing all of you live right now on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.